We are now in section 2, the value streams and processes dimension for this practice. There will be 5 questions from this section in the exam. Just like the previous section, the key concepts of information security management will also have 5 questions. Together, section 1 and 2 make up 10 questions of the 20 in the exam. So section 1 and 2 are therefore carry the most marks in the exam. Nevertheless, the other sections from 3 until 7 are also important because they carry the remaining 10 marks in the exam. For the exam syllabus, for this section, we need to understand and apply the processes of the practice. So what we will be doing is look at the inputs and outputs of each of the following 4 processes that will come up. We also look at the key activities under each of the 4 processes. And we will also learn how to integrate the practice within the organization's value streams. Now, the third portion, the integration of the practice in the organization value streams, is about applying the concepts. Everything else is just theory. The Bloom's learning level 2, testing level 2, which is about understanding the concepts. You will have those kind of questions for everything that has been taught so far. But 2.3 will have application kind of questions. And there's a likelihood of just one question because the 5 marks for this section are together for all these 3 topics here. So we don't know, but generally there could be one question on the last topic, the value stream one, that is. So now we can see this practice has 4 processes, each process having its own activities, certain inputs and outputs. The outputs are created using the inputs due to the activities being done within that process. So we have the first one, which is information security planning and implementation. Then we have information security controls, tests and exercises. Then information security incident management, and lastly, information security assessment and review. The challenge for the exam is having to remember many inputs, many outputs, and many of the activities, and a bit of detail around the activities as well for each of these 4 processes. Therefore, it is essential that you, after you go through this recording, you also take multiple looks at the various tables for inputs, outputs, and activities that will come up for these 4 processes. As you can already see, there is a lot of information, could be a bit overwhelming in this table. So we need to make some method out of this madness to be able to tackle questions in the exam. For example, a question could be based on the sample paper that I have seen is which of the below is an input for the information security planning and implementation process, which means that you would have to remember these inputs properly. Of course, there is no need to memorize everything. You need to have some kind of understanding and use your own logical thinking and conclude what could be specific inputs, outputs, or activities. So let's get started with all this. So this is the information security planning and implementation process. So both the planning and the implementation of the controls, etc., happens here. Therefore, naturally, that would need lots of inputs to perform the planning and implementation. Therefore, we can see quite a lot here, such as the organization strategy would influence the planning, the information security standards and regulations, both internal and external, would influence relevant industry reports for better planning, the risk management approach of the organization, and it is essential to know what products and services are being developed and serviced by the company, and information about the organization's resources for planning purposes, that is, about partners and suppliers, about the business and technological environment. So those are some of the key inputs there. Also, there are other inputs such as previous assessment reports for the various controls that are already in place, because the planning is not a one-time activity. Then there could have been some improvement suggestions as well. Though we have a separate process for review and improvement, but it can become an input here also for planning. And then we have the overall organizational and technology context as well within the organization and the technology that they use. And then the various tests and exercise reports from the past to look at those reports and see if the planning can be done in a better way. And then for the past incidents, certain incident review reports and the lessons learned. So quite a lot with respect to the inputs here. And the outputs, because it's a planning and implementation process, we'll take a look at the outputs first. There would be some sort of organizational analysis first. because only based on that, the information security management scope and objectives can be derived as another output. And further, more important, the information security policies will come up based on the scope and objectives after the analysis, that is. And there will also be certain assessment reports, such as a vulnerability or a weakness assessment report, and then a threat assessment report about likely security events that might occur because of those vulnerabilities or weaknesses in the environment. Then the risk register will capture some of the risks which will surface during the planning, because certain actions may be required to take actions to treat those risks. Then we also have the information security, the actual plans and controls with specific responsibilities, tasks, ownerships, target dates, etc. And awareness and training materials are needed because as part of the implementation, people, employees, etc. need to be made aware about the policies, controls, etc. And they need to comply with them as well. So there will be definitely those awareness and training materials. Then during implementation of controls, there are likelihood that there could be some requests for changes. For example, changing a certain service environment or developing something new as a control, and certain project initiatives as well. So therefore, we have logically these key outputs. So the activities here now are the following. There are 5 of them. It begins by analyzing the organization strategy and context. Then based on that, define and agree the information security policies. Then we have conduct an information security risk assessment so that the risks can also be understood while the policies are already agreed. Then based on the policies and the strategy and context and the risks, the appropriate controls and planned for the information security can be defined and agreed. Then once that is done, then the next step logically would be to communicate these policies to everyone and to implement these controls and plans across the organization. This is a schematic for the process, and it's also essential for us to know which output comes in which activity. So we have seen there are 5 activities in this process, as shown by the darker boxes. And some of the key inputs are shown here at the top here, such as standards and regulations, assessment reports, improvement suggestions, organizational technology and context. These become key inputs for the first step, which is analyze the organization strategy and context. Therefore, naturally, the output from this activity would be the organization analysis, the information management, security management scope and objectives. Previously, in that table, we saw all the outputs together, but here we are seeing the output shown against each activity. So be aware of this also for the exam. You never know, in the exam, you might have a question. For example, which of the below options is an output of this activity, analyze organization strategy in context? Then you would have to know that these are the outputs below shown here, as shown here, the organization analysis and the scope and objectives, and not the others, which are from the other activities. And remember, there are 5 questions coming up in this topic, from this topic in the exam. Therefore, it's good to work hard on this processes section in particular, and the previous section for the key concepts, that is, together make up 10 questions, which make 50% of the exam questions. Now, the next step is to define and agree the information security policies. This is where naturally the output would be the policies. Then the next is to conduct information security risk assessment. Therefore, there would be logically a risk register with entries in there. And there would be since there is an assessment, we would have 2 assessment reports, one, the vulnerability one, and the other one, the threat assessment report. And followed by the next step, define and agree the information security plans and controls. Therefore, the output is easy here. Those will be the plans and controls for information security. And lastly, in the last step, it's about communicating the policies and the controls and the plans as well. And also to implement them. Therefore, awareness and training materials, request for changes, and project initiatives to implement the controls. So you should read the last box as communicate the information security policies and implement the information security controls and plans across the organization.